Here is where it gets a little bit more tricky with math. So we're going to have to figure out what is the distance from here to here to here to here. I have everything done for my carcass. Now I need to cut in the dados and rabbets, the grooves that all of these shelves fit into behind the face frame. Okay, so remember when we pull the face frame off, all of the shelves are 3/4 of an inch thick. But for this, I needed to redraw this so that it showed these 1.5 inch face frame pieces, because it's the spacing between them that I want correct. So to help us out, I even brought out a calculator. I would highly recommend that. Sometimes you don't end up at an exact even number. So I do have other methods that'll help. All right, so what we need to figure out, how much space is all of these put together? So in other words, I need the total and subtract all of these little bits. So all I have left is how much space do I have to work with, so I know how big each drawer opening is going to be. That will determine my distance down between each piece. So there's a bit of math. I'll write it all on the board and hopefully you can follow with me. The total top to bottom is 36 inches. So we'll just go 36 inches, write that a little darker, there we go. Now I know that the distance from the bottom of this to the top of this shelf, so from here to the floor, is 4. That is very much a standard in my class, and that was something we showed in the very first video. So I can already subtract 4 and I'm down to 32 inches. Good. Now the next step is, I know that this very top one is 1.5. Okay, so I can subtract another 1.5 and we're now down to 30.5 left, 30.5 more. Now in between them, I have a 1.5, a 1.5, and another 1.5 that I have to subtract out. And those are my last 3. So if I just go 1.5 plus 1.5 plus 1.5, and you can do this either decimal, you can do it in your head, you can calculate it, whatever. I know that that is 4.5. So I need to subtract that from my 30.5 I'm still working with. So 30.5 minus 4.5 will give me 26. That is how much space, open space, I have. It's this area plus that plus that plus that. Now you can take your calculator and decide what you want. So I know if I wanted 2 drawers, just 2 giant drawers, all you've got to do is say 26 divided by 2 will give me 13-inch openings, and that's huge. Those are gigantic. If that works for you, great. Now I can also divide by 3, and it's just simply 26 divided by 3 gives me 8.6666 repeating. So I don't know exactly what that is in fraction off the top of my head, but I do know that it's really close to 8 5/8 or 8 11/16. 8 11/16 is probably a little closer. If that's too much weird math for you, that's okay, but you decide. But it's getting closer to what I wanted. So I'll just write that down. About 8 11/16 per space. That's another choice. Now me, I wanted 4 openings. So you divide that by 4. Simply 26 divided by 4 should give me 6.5, and it does. So each one is now 6.5, and that's a little closer to what I wanted. About 6.5-inch drawer is pretty good size. Now originally I said that I wanted these 2 a little bigger, or excuse me, a little smaller, and these 2 a little bit bigger. But as I did the math, things changed in my head. I decided differently. If I wanted these to be 6 inches, then these both would be 7, and it's not different enough that I would want that. I'd need them a few inches different to make it worth what I wanted, the look I was going for. So now, instead, I'm just going to make them all the same. So every distance from here to there will be 6 1/2 inches, 6 1/2, 6 1/2, and so forth, all the way down. So I will now have perfectly even drawers, which works just as well. You can decide from here the configuration. But what we do out there, and I'm going to show you in a second on the sides, you start at the top and measure down 1.5, then measure down 6.5, then measure down 1.5 and 6.5, and so forth. So I'm taking in consideration that these are all 1.5. By the time I hit the bottom, that last distance should be 4. And then we'll go on the table saw and cut the grooves. Now we're going to put all those measurements onto your sides. But here's something to remember. Remember that my part had drawers, if I draw this out lightly, drawers on this side, but doors on this side. So the side on the left, this one is going to need all of those extra grooves, those dados. The side on the right is only going to need one at the bottom and one at the top. Now if I accidentally draw them on there, that's fine. Just be careful, don't cut them on this side. So I line them up side by side so they're perfectly flush. Okay, there we go. So that's perfectly straight across. Now here's the ones I know for sure. I know that the bottom is 4 inches up. So I can put it right at 4 right there, and I'll draw it on both of them. Since they're side by side, I know that that's going to be even. Now that's 4 inches, and now I go down 3/4 of an inch. That's the thickness of the shelf I'm putting in. There's 3/4 right there, and I like to put an X. That just helps my brain, so I know that's the cut. Now I know the top is going to be exactly the same as well. I just measure down 3/4 of an inch. There's my line, and I put an X. So I've got a rabbet at the top, a dado at the bottom. Other than that, this one gets the rest. This one's done. I can actually move that aside. I'm finished. I'm not getting any grooves in that one. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. You've got to remember the measurements. I'm going to measure down 1.5. Just put a little line right there so I don't think I have to cut there. From there, I have to go down 6.5. So I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5. That's 8. 6.5 plus 1.5 is 8. There's that there. And I do another 3/4 of an inch. That is my cut. Now I know that the face frame sticks down further than that, but I need to know where the cut is. That's what I'm marking, not where the face frame is. Now I go down from 8, 1.5. I'm starting back at the top here, 1.5. That's where my face frame will be. Now the opening is from there down, another 6.5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5. I'm down to 16, and that is where my cut's going to be. Down 3/4 of an inch. That's my dado. Okay, we do this one more time. 16 plus 1.5, 17.5. And I go from there 6.5 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5. I'm now down to 24. 24 3/4 is my 3/4 inch cut. And if I measured all the way down and just to check, 1.5 down is right there. And I want to check that the opening there to the opening there is 6.5, and indeed it is. I can see on my tape measure. So now, even though these distances aren't perfectly the same from top to bottom, when I put the face frame on, they will be. It takes out that 3/4 of an inch. That way they will be guaranteed the same. Now I do know that there's a middle panel, of course, right here. This one in the center, I'm going to need grooves in as well. I will get to that a little bit later, but for now I'm just getting these sides done and marked so I'm ready to move on. This part is for those that actually have a center divider like I do. If you do not, you don't need to worry about this part. I haven't cut the center divider because I'm always cautious about my measurements, so I know exactly how big it is. Mathematics tells me one thing, reality may be something a little different. And we've learned that already as we've changed things as we've gone along. So the easiest way to figure out how long does that center divider need to be? It's made of plywood, so I don't need to glue anything up. All you've got to do is measure from the very top. I can see my mark down here at the bottom. That's where the bottom shelf is going to be, is right there. Okay? So all I need to know is where does it hit that shelf and add 1/4 of an inch. It's going to go down into a dado. That's going to be a 1/4 inch deep. This is 32, straight on 32 inches exactly to that. So my shelf, my divider, excuse me, needs to be 32 1/4 long and 17 inches deep. That's the same depth that all of these are. So 17 inches is the same depth as every web frame and also the bottom shelf. So that is a constant. I just needed to know that length. Now I can go cut that, and then I'll have all my pieces for my carcass.
If you use a table saw to cut your shelves, make sure to rip first. That way it wastes less. After that, cut it to length. Remember to always look at where it's touching the fence so you avoid a kickback.
Now that I have the centered partition, the divider, instead of measuring everything again, I simply set it next to the side that gets all those grooves so I can match them up. So I need to match up the top. The top is where I'm measuring from. There, that's perfect. And indeed, it does stick over this line 1/4 of an inch. So all we need to do now is just simply mark them in. There's no measuring. Draw the lines, put an X, so there's no doubt. Okay, and that's it. So, and then of course one at the top. There we go, and we're all set to move on.
Now that you're ready to cut your dados, you can either use the panel router, or you are welcome to use the table saw. To set up for your rabbet cut along the top edge, simply line up the face of the fence with the inside edge of the tooth on that blade. As you run your board carefully across the blade, make sure to hold it down so that the depth is consistent. Take a look at your boards before you cut. Look for the lines you put on so that you don't cut on the wrong side or in the wrong place. For your next cut down, measure from the top edge of your side to the top of the next dado and match that measurement from the face of the fence to the inside tooth of that blade. The fence moves easily, so take your time and make sure the dimension is accurate before you cut. Continue using exactly the same process from the top edge of your board to the top of the following dado. Match that line and then go ahead and cut. Make sure to hold it down the whole time. You'll notice that the farther and farther away that the fence gets from the blade, the harder it is to hold your board straight. Make sure both your hands are on the inside of the blade, holding your board straight the whole time.
The last major cut that we have to do before I can start seeing if things fit together is I'm going to need a rabbet in the back so that the back insets a little bit. Now, be careful. Some mistakes are easily made on this point. Here are my two fronts. These are my two narrow ones. They're mirror images. They're both inside. The rabbet's in the back, so you need to make sure to mark the wider ones. There's one here and, of course, one here. So I put an X on the back side, so I know that's where the rabbet's going to go, top to bottom, and on this far side. That way, we don't have two lefts or two rights.
When you're cutting rabbets, make sure to hold your board tight down on the table and tight against the fence.
The last thing that I need to do before I can start dry fitting a few things together is this center partition. I need to make one last cut. Now here's the reason why. You're saying, well, I've got all these grooves, isn't that what I wanted? Yes, except for the top. Now in the very beginning, I mentioned that I wanted the partition to go underneath the top web frame so that I could screw down into it. It gives it some support. But right now, I have it cut so it's flush with the top, so that web frame would butt into it, and I don't want that. That means I'd have to cut my web frame in half and glue it all that way. By cutting off 3/4 of an inch, now the web frame will slide across the top and then I can nail it down. The only reason that I haven't cut it off yet is I needed this to be flush, measured from the top of my side, so when I did all my dado cuts, the reference from the top is accurate, is the same. Otherwise, I would be off 3/4 of an inch on every dado on this side, unless I move the fence every single time. It just saved me time. So all I've got to do is cut off 3/4 of an inch. Now you never set it to 3/4. Find the exact measurement and subtract 3/4 of an inch. I have 32 1/4. Subtract 3/4 from that, it's 31 1/2. So set it to 31 1/2 and cut off the top edge. The other groove that we need to make is down the center of this board. Now because, like I said before, mathematics says one thing, and that may be true for that, but then you have to deal with reality. Sometimes these boards are a little off, and I just want to make sure that it's in the right place. Now because I've got partitions on this side, shelves on this side, nothing on this side, I have to measure from this side. So I take one of the web frames that I made that goes above this area, and I stick it on top, and I make it flush here. So it's the same depth, and so I make this end flush. Both of these boards stick into the side 1/4 of an inch, so they will be flush with each other in the same vertical plane. And then I just draw a line right there down the middle. Okay, now what that represents is the end of my web frame. So I need to come in 1/4 of an inch. My center is going to be in this way 1/4 because there's a dado in that center partition. So you just take your tape measure. I like to do it close to the edge. Doesn't do as much good in the center, but it's up to you. Just measure 1/4 of an inch. There's my 1/4 of an inch in this side. Now I just measure from here to that new line I just put on, and I have 23 1/4. Whatever it is for you, that is what you're going to set the table saw to, from the fence to the inside of the dado blade. And the cut, if I mark that down, from that line I now have to here, that is where my cut's going to be. So from that 1/4 inch, I go out 3/4. That is where the groove is going to end up. And we can set that and cut that.
Because of the far distance from the fence to the blade, it can be tricky to cut this center dado. Make sure that you have hands on both sides of the blade. Hold it down flat and make sure to pay attention to the gap between the board and the fence to avoid a kickback.